The Fanatec GT2 European Series starts season 2022 and makes its Imola debut as we get set for the first of two 50-minute races this weekend. And as we do so, spots of rain are in the air. It has been declared a wet race. The car's coming to the grid. The track temperature is a mere 13.8 degrees. It is not the warmest of days. The early morning sunshine has gone. Thick jackets and woolly hats are rather more in evidence now. Many of them Valentino Rossi hats, because he's racing here this weekend in the GT3 category. But we are still set for an interesting race nonetheless, with some returning drivers from last season and with some new names as well for the GT2 concept. David Addison and Ben Constanduros trackside. The grid starting to take shape, and it is a grid that might be relatively small because we've got 13 cars set to go racing, but it's a grid of different shapes and sizes, from the Audi to the KTM to the Porsche, for example, and also in terms of the drivers. Some very experienced, some rather less so.
Most excited to see how we have the Brabham get on this weekend. Unfortunately, having a few issues in practice and qualifying, so we'll start at the tail end of the field, but it's run effectively by the champions from last year, and we did see it once last year as well, but nice to see a new model, a new shape, a new brand join this GT2 ranks.
It does make a great noise as well, and the sound of a GT car has always been part of the appeal, hasn't it? So the Brabham makes, as I say, a great noise, and it will, for the first part of the first race, be driven by Kevin Wieder, before the reigning champion Anders Fjordbach, very experienced, very quick driver, takes it over. On pole position is going to be the LP Racing Elia Earhart and Michael Doppelmayr Audi. Number 7 is Gianluca Giorgi in the Ebby Motors pseudo Martini liveried Porsche.
Done well with that livery.
It's great, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
And you've got, I think, also on the grid, Leonardo Gaurini's Porsche in the kind of cigarette livery that adorn the works cars as well. Stefan Rattel, who raced in the championship last year, strides down the grid to go and check on the LP Racing squad for whom he drove last season. And there is the experienced former Porsche racer, Elia Earhart, who's driven in the ADAC GT Masters GT Championship as well. He is on pole position. Michael Doppelmayr to take over the car, and alongside for PK Car Sport is Stinus Longin, Bert's son, and Nicholas Salens, and it's going to be Nicholas Salens who will start. There he is. So for PK Car Sport, it is the Audi R8 type of car that was the car to beat last year, but it was the high-class racing squad that took the title last year. Right, let's go down to the grid. It's Elia Earhart on pole position, and down there on the grid is Gemma Scott.
Elia, it was an impressive qualifying session that you put in. You found a clear space on the track and you got over a second.
Yeah, I was lucky guy because I had a clean lap. The car was fantastic. LP Racing did an amazing job, yeah. And yeah, it was a free lap, and then that's it for the qualifying. And now it's tricky condition. We start with slick tires, but it's raining. The first part of the track is dry, but the last part is completely wet, and yeah, we will see.
Have a good race and enjoy it. Yeah. Thank you. It's definitely going to be tricky.
Enjoy it, says Gemma, with a voice laden with doom, I think, given the conditions, if they're changing that much. And it's a driver's nightmare, Ben, isn't it? Some of the circuit dry, some of the circuit wet. You've just got no confidence in the consistency of the lap.
It's weird because we're not at a place like Spa that spans kilometres and kilometres. Yeah. It's quite a condensed circuit. So certainly where we are, the track looks dry, looking over the start-finishing line. There's a couple of spots on the lens, but interesting to hear how wet it is in the final sector. And it's, I think, also different types of tarmac obviously react differently. And so we might see it quite slippy through that final sector, which is possibly the toughest sector of the lap. It's a hard lap to drive anyway, but look at that thing. Brilliant, the KTM.
With that very quirky bodywork, you see in the pit stops, of which there are mandatory stops, that it's not a door that opens, it's the whole front section sort of lifts up and forward. And it can look a bit bizarre, but the KTMs last year were very, very quick cars, took an outright win in the hands of Christoph Ulrich, and a very cost-effective way of going GT2 racing, almost, you could argue, to the detriment of others, because people were realising they didn't have to go off and spend Audi or Porsche money, for example, because there was the cheaper KTM that was a very, very quick car anyway. So wipers on, the safety car, rain falling. But I wouldn't say that that was backing up what you just heard from Elia Earhart on pole position.
Certainly from what we've seen, it's been very light rain everywhere. And so I would expect once they get the temperature into these tyres, the tyres will stick and kind of burn through any slippiness of the circuit. But
yes, it's almost a race, isn't it, between tyre temperature and the rain?
Yeah.
Can you get the tyres up to temperature before the rain gets worse? You're right.
I think that shot's from up at Variante Alta, and it does look like it's falling much heavier than certainly where we are here.
So the formation lap underway. The GT2 formula brought in last year, aimed really at the amateur racer. Yes, the cars have wings, but it's not all about aero. And Elia Earhart will start on pole position with Nicholas Salins alongside. On the second row of the grid, Gianluca Giorgi lines up alongside Henri Hassid, who was a regular a few years ago in the Rockpan Endurance Series, as it was then called, before going off to race in the ELMS. Klaus Angerhofer starts from 5th, and former rallyman Chris Rosenberg at 6th. The True Racing KTMs locking out the 3rd row. Row 4 is where your Target Racing, you find Pierluigi Alessandri, and then Leonardo Gaurini lines up alongside him. Got the Lamborghini and the Porsche together. Peter Gulinks for PK Car Sport and the KTM of Sedi Sarmini line up on the 5th row. Both of them returning, they were in the championship last season. Aurelius Rustica in the high-class racing Audi is next on the grid, with lining up alongside aboard 88 Angelo Negro from Hong Kong, and it is Kevin Wieder at the rear of the grid. Aurelius Rustica, who last year drove a Porsche, but got a bit frustrated, I think, with the car. Despite the best efforts of him and Michael Vergers, they just couldn't quite unlock the potential of it. So they've gone the Audi route for this year, and it'll be interesting to see what progress they can make as they get more used to the car. Rolling start, so at the end of this, the cars don't stop on the grid, straight into the race. If Peter Daly, the race director, is happy with the formation, he can give the indication that we can go racing and then get things underway. The GT2 concept, which is growing, and it's interesting to see new names coming in for this year, and hopefully it will continue to build and build. New names, Ben, in terms of drivers, but also cars as well, like you were saying about the Brabham, which is good to have on the grid.
Absolutely, great to see. Even though they start at the back, expect them to go and move forward. This is our locked off shot at the top of the hill. You can certainly see more rain on the runoff areas, just at the bottom of shot there. It looks shiny. It's definitely raining more up there than it is down here, and that literally is about 400 meters from where we are right now. So fascinating to see that Gemma on the grid saying even the podium end is wetter than the start finishing part of the circuit. So it's not wet tyres for sure. It's not wet enough for that, but you're just going to need to be careful in the second half of the lap, where in rally terms, you'd say it's shiny.
Yeah. So the drivers on the first lap are going to be real pioneers, aren't they, in terms of discovering just what those track conditions are like. And as Ben rightly says, if you can get the tyres up to temperature, they will probably be able, the Pirelli rubber, to work on this greasy surface. But is it going to dry out or get fully wet all the way around? 911 there, Leonardo Gaurini lines up in the Pseudo Works old colours of Porsche in number 911, as now the cars get themselves into the Noah's Ark 2x2 rolling start formation. It's 50 minutes. There's a mandatory pit window between 20 and 30. We are set to go racing then, as the cars now accelerate their way up towards the timing line. Elia Earhart, the pole position driver, the one with the wiper going nearest to us, number 18 there, with the Belgian colours adorning the car of Nicholas Salins, who will start alongside him. So the opening round of the Fanatec GT2 European Series about to get underway then, as the cars work their way up towards the line. The lights will change. The race will get underway any moment, because there now the lights go green up towards the start line, which is further down the pit straight, and it is Salins that makes the best start, but coming back at him on the inside line, Earhart goes through. So Earhart it is, from pole position, responds, goes through, grabs the lead as they head into Tamburello for the first time. Third is going to be Gianluca Giorgi, and bouncing up over the curb, Leonardo Gaurini's Porsche, as they clear Tamburello for the first time.
Got to be so careful. We saw wheel spin from the 15 KTM of Rosenberger as he accelerated on the start-finishing line. Something going bouncing, but a really good effort from Eli Earhart, who's obviously got good temperature into those tyres, got confidence in the car, and is able to stretch away as we have a battle for second.
And up the inside goes the Porsche. So a good move by Gianluca Giorgi. He goes ahead of Nicholas Salins. The car has a little bit of a twitch. Nicholas is the one seemingly less comfortable with the track surface as it stands, whereas Eli Earhart is getting away up front. Cars climb the row. And there, wriggling through, Henri Hassid trying to gain back places. The KTM's also in the mix. But Salins, considering he got the drop on everybody, is falling away from the top two markedly, isn't he?
Yeah, and Rosenberger there getting wide through Piratello, getting onto the curbs and just didn't have any drive at all there. So slippy on the curbs, now losing a third place from what was quite a good start, was a sketchy start. And further back, Audi's side by side into the chicane as well. Again, be careful here.
Yeah, all over the curb in the middle there goes one of the KTMs. They bounce their way over the curb, and if you get on wet curbing and then accelerate, again, got no traction and you fall away. Peter Gulink's number 81 in the other PK Car Sport entry, tiptoeing his way over the brow, but as the confidence builds, as the tire temperature comes up, he's going to commit to the inside line and he goes through. Chris Rosenberger there in the KTM, as you've been saying, dropping down and down and down through the field with his rally background. That's a surprise.
Doesn't look comfortable at all. Maybe the car's too stiff, but he would have really been spooked by the fact that at this point, one lap ago, he put his foot down and the car squirmed even from a rolling start. So that would have really spooked him and shows that he hasn't got any temperature in those tyres right now.
The other one that's dropping back is Nicholas Salins, who is struggling. So it is Eli Earhart in the lead. Gianluca Giorgi is second. In third place then is Nicholas Salins. In fourth is Henri Hassid. Fifth is Leonardo Gaurini, and Klaus Angerhofer is sixth.
Unbelievable gaps after one lap. 4 seconds separate the top two. 10 seconds separate the top three, just showing the difference that confidence and getting the tyres up to temperature makes.
Absolutely right. So they're going through is 88, which is the Angelo Negro Audi. He shares that with Luca Piri. Effectively, that's the seat that Stefan Rattel occupied last year in the LP racing car. Leonardo Gaurini, in the meantime, getting onto the back of Nicholas Salins. And it shouldn't take Gaurini long, I wouldn't have thought now, to clear the Audi. He looks to the inside line. Is he going to make the move? Thinks about it down to the Acqua Minerale, thinks better of it. And what that means is that he's now been caught by Klaus Angerhofer in the orange KTM behind. Angerhofer is going nicely here, picking off places quite markedly.
Yeah, so Gaurini came over the line in second position. That's him dropping to third. Whether that was a mistake that we didn't see, he was fast through the first sector, but lost time in the second. Earhart well up the road at the moment.
And then Gianluca Giorgi's Porsche in second place, and then you've got this battle for third, which is Nicholas Salins being shown as Stinus Longchamp, but we are told it is Salins doing the first stint. Then behind him is Leonardo Gaurini. The one that we've lost out of that, I think, is Henri Hassid, who's fallen away. Meantime, the fight for third comes up towards the timing line. Through they go, and again, the Porsche just breezes by, doesn't it? So Leonardo Gaurini will be third by the end of the lap. In fact, make that fourth by the end of the lap, because Henri Hassid had cleared them and pulled away. So it's the fight for fourth we're looking at. And so Gaurini goes fourth, down to sixth, in fact, now is Salins, because through on the inside line goes the charging Klaus Angerhofer, number 17. Through he goes on the inside there.
So suddenly the cars start to come alive in a different way than we first saw them. Rosenberger, who qualified well up, has dropped all the way down to 11th, but it does look like Angerhofer in the 17 KTM has a lot more confidence and is able to start pushing. Alessandri in the lone Lamborghini, now the next person on the tail of that number 11 Audi.
PK Car Sport having a bit of a nightmare with its driver ID system, because the wrong driver's shown in both cars at the moment. Number 9 there is the Lamborghini, Pierluigi Alessandri. Good to have Lamborghini back on the grid. As many different brands as possible being represented. Now, Elia Earhart's lead is already 5 seconds over Gianluca Giorgi, and then Henri Hassid in third position. An effort being made possibly there by Peter Gullings to see what he can do on the inside, but thinks better of it. Ready to let Bert Longin perhaps be the brave one in the second stint. The Brabham, I'm afraid to say, is still quite a long way adrift, but may have just gained a place at the expense of Sedi Sarmini. Leader through, so Eli Earhart for LP Racing. Luca Piri's team well clear. Second place across the line is Gianluca Giorgi's Porsche, 4.9 seconds, gap down a fraction.
Yeah, fastest lap of the race from Giorgi, but a big gap of 8 seconds between himself and Hassid, and then there's 4.5 between Hassid and Giorgi, just showing if you got it right in those first couple of laps, you really were able to establish yourself. But good battling going on further down the field. Improvising with racing lines.
Yeah, and I think part of this is the nervousness of Nicholas Salins here, because he's just not making progress. Peter Gullings in the sister car with the headlights flashing there behind the Lamborghini of Pierluigi Alessandri, looking for a way by as well. Big thump of the curb as they come through the Villeneuve chicane, but there Peter Gullings, who went well last year with race wins, in turn has got Angelo Negro right up behind him in the number 88 Audi. So this battle pack is getting bigger all the time.
And as you speculated earlier, the Brabham up 2 places now to 11th, passing the 2 KTMs at the tail of the field. Both the 15 and 16 do not look comfortable, whether they were kind of qualified out of position by their other driver. But Rosenberger and Sarmini, 12th, 13th, and their pace some 15 seconds off what we're seeing at the head of the field.
Yeah, Rosenberger puzzles me because he was on the 3rd row of the grid and has really struggled in the race. As again there, Alessandri has a look to the inside and also committing Angelo Negro, who couldn't get through and ended up having to take to the grass rather than make contact there. So he didn't gain anything out of all of that other than avoided an accident, because he was set for contact had he tried to stay on that line, so he jinked out of the way. And that means that Peter Gullings carries on.
He committed a bit.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Big slide and a good save, pretty much, by Pierluigi Alessandri. He's back onto the racetrack. But again, that shows that still the conditions are enough to catch you out.
That was very odd, wasn't it? Mid-corner just kind of broke away from him. Have a look again. Had he dipped his wheel onto the curb? Yes, I think it's difficult to see from that low angle, but I think he was turning in with his rear right on the curb. And of course, that is the worst place to be on a circuit of the greasy nature.
Yes.
Just spat him sideways.
I was also wondering whether or not he hadn't been a little bit faster than the car ahead coming up to that next corner and almost got caught out. But either way, it's cost him a load of places, so he's fallen back down into 9th. Now, how is Gianluca Giorgi getting on? He's taken 3/10 out of the leader in the first sector, but then an absolute best by the leader in sector 2, the leader still being Eli Earhart. So it's a bit elasticated, the gap between them. Audi versus Porsche. Actually, Gianluca Giorgi doing what we haven't really seen the Porsches do hitherto, and that's take the fight to the Audis.
In terms of,
that was last year, the Porsche, sorry.
Yeah, in terms of lap time, it's been they've been swapping to and fro, haven't they, in terms of the fastest lap time, and that time getting faster and faster every lap that the track seems to be drying up here. It's certainly on circuit, on the tarmac, it's drier, but offline, if you do what we've just seen there, then you can put yourself in a bit of strife. Racing line dry, offline still a bit damp.
Now this is Leonardo Gaurini, who is 4th, and Klaus Angerhofer, who is 5th, closing right up there, coming down to Rivazza. Wiper still on the KTM. The rain is not falling particularly, but it might be there more for confidence. Gaurini comes up towards the timing line. The lead gap 7.6 seconds now, as again Eli Earhart stretches the margin. And Leonardo Gaurini hanging on to that 4th place, isn't he?
That Porsche does have legs, doesn't it? Blimey, how it picks up coming out of Rivazza and just gives himself a couple of breathings, a couple of car lengths breathing space. But then into the braking zone, the KTM looks stronger through Tamburello and through the corners in general.
What's going to be interesting as well, just fast forward if you like to the second stint, is the leading car will make a driver change, the second place car does not. So the Porsche can run at the same pace pretty much, whereas it's going to be interesting to see how the Austrian Michael Doppelmayr shapes up relative to the pace of Eli Earhart, who's done the first stint in the leading car, and of course to the man that's going to be fighting in for the win, Gianluca Giorgi. So the first 10 minutes gone. The Brabham has just howled past the pits in 11th. The next target for it to be the Aurelius Rustica Audi. And Chris Rosenberger, 6th on the grid, now running in last place. But for everybody, the lap times are coming down, suggesting that the road is getting drier. And out wide there goes Angelo Negro, so he loses a place. Back to Pierluigi Alessandri as the Audi got caught out and ran wide.
Yeah, now the pace of those KTMs at the tail of the field starting to match the Brabham once again. So we might see them recatch the Brabham and pass as the circuit seems to be getting drier. But in the slipperier conditions, certainly the KTM, a car that was really, really struggling.
Contact has been noted at turn 2 between 81 and 11, the two teammates at PK Carsport. So that means Peter Gulings and Nicholas Salins have had a little brush with one another. We didn't see it particularly, but the information is there. So PK Carsport's slightly troubled race. First of all, it was driver ID. Now it's contact between the cars. And Henri Acid is a bit lonely here in 3rd place. Another absolute best in the first sector by Gianluca Giorgi against Eli Earhart to try and bring down the gap. Henri Acid loses half a second in the first sector of the lap alone. But for the moment, at least, he's securing that 3rd place. But Gianluca Giorgi doing his level best to take the fight here on a drying circuit to the leading Audi.
It does seem as though the Porsche is stronger through that first sector, but then the Audis are better in the 2nd and 3rd sectors of the lap. It doesn't seem to be much of a difference in characteristic to those sectors, but perhaps the top-end speed of the Porsche that seems to be very, very strong coming across the start-finishing line into the Tamburello is helping them do that.
Michael Vergos was saying last year about the Porsche that it was a really tricky car to get the handling absolutely right. It just seemed to have a bit of inherent understeer, and maybe that's one reason why they've gone the Audi route. But equally, therefore, it's not quite as plug and play maybe as some of the other cars. So it really does take a bit more for the driver, for the team to get a handle on it and get the confidence out of the Porsche maybe.
I mean, the KTM here is being driven much, much cleaner, online, in the right places, whereas you do think that the Porsche is a little bit more ragged, and yet still being able to stay ahead by that grunt. Again, missing the apex there, but he just can get the throttle down and scuttle off.
Exactly right. So the KTM heads up towards the line. The championship with an AM and a Pro-Am element to it, and the overall race leader, Eli Earhart, is an AM. The leading Pro-Am is number 11, the Nicolas Salins and Stinus Longin Audi. But right now, Eli Earhart, who qualified the car on pole position, is doing an outstanding job building the gap. It's already about 9.5 seconds. And Peter Gulings, after his brush with teammate Nicolas Salins, has now got ahead of him up into 6th place.
Yeah, we've got that Lamborghini in close attendance as well to the two teammates. So great little battle going on for 6th position. At the start-finishing line, we have to wait quite a while before the last 3 cars come across the line.
Just looking at the pace of Aurelius Rustica relative to Angelo Negro as there on the inside line. Pierluigi Alessandri has a go. So Negro is at the back of the queue, but then behind him, almost with them, is Aurelius Rustica. So the Lithuanian driver trying to close the gap as best he can, but after running wide and dropping places a lap or 2 back, Angelo Negro trying to regroup and rebuild, get back up the order if he can.
Interesting that now the 81 has got ahead. He's certainly made a gap to Salins. They've been fighting it out for a few laps, but it's almost as though he's now been released and he's scuttling off up the road.
Out of the chicane at the Variante Alta they come. They're not far off the pit window opening as well. So for Eli Earhart, he's got to do this driver change to Michael Doppelmayr. Gianluca Giorgi, as we were saying, stays in the car. He can run to the end on that pace. Now, after one big slide that cost him ground, Pierluigi Alessandri is regrouping very definitely. And he's about to try and make a move as they come up towards the line. So you've got Audi versus Lamborghini, the two of them almost nose to tail now as they come through. Peter Gulings pulling away, but Nicolas Salins now has Alessandri right up behind him, and the Lamborghini is close, heading up towards the Tamburello, but not able to get through.
We have seen a change for fourth. KTM now ahead of Porsche that we were watching for the last couple of laps. Engelhofer has found a way through. Now, will that release the KTM? I think it will, because it did seem as though the KTM better pace. There they are now, and I think that happened last lap.
Okay, so yeah, Engelhofer, there he is, as you say, through and also pulling away. So the next target for him is Henri Hassid, as there to the inside goes Alessandri, and there's contact and another spin for the Lamborghini as around it goes. So he bounced off the side, didn't he, there, of Nicolas Salens, coming through Tosa. Around goes the Lamborghini, and Pierluigi Alessandri gets going again. A little bit of damage done to Audi and to Lamborghini. Here it is again, Ben.
He's tried this a couple of times. He's alongside enough, isn't he, this time? Previous encounters, he hasn't been quite there, and the Audi giving him a bit of a squeeze. And again, like we saw earlier, when you then have to get off the throttle, you unbalance the car, the rear end comes around.
Leonardo Gaurini, in the meantime, dropping back into the pack, so having lost fourth place, and he's lost time against the KTM as well. Up towards the line they come. Now, Engelhofer's lap times are certainly better, not only than Henri Hassid ahead of him, but at the moment, anybody ahead of him. So Klaus Engelhofer's KTM looking very good as you get towards the end of the stint. Hubert Trunkenpolz will take over, but that car's progress looking very, very impressive right now. Started fifth on the grid, now running in fourth place. And we're 2 minutes and a bit away from the pit stops, potentially. So there is Eli Earhart with a big flash of the lights.
Yep, starting his lappery.
Ahead of Sadi Sarmini. So fastest lap of the race done by Eli Earhart, comes through. And there's the LP racing car. It'll get certainly one more lap before it needs to pit, but the way that he's going, you'd suggest that Earhart stays in for as long as possible and try and build the gap, build the lead for his co-driver to protect in the second stint.
Especially as we know that, as you've alluded to, Giorgi can do that time, and he will be staying aboard that Porsche. Fastest middle sector of anyone from this KTM of Engelhofer, who's just passed Rosenberger, putting a lap on him. Is it going to be a fastest lap of the race so far? It is, 45.8. Great pace in this second half of the stint for Engelhofer, but he's going to have to hand it over soon. Should be a bit of a disappointment. Here's a replay of the passing move then, down to Ravazza. Quite late.
It was.
He needed the space, didn't he? Otherwise, there'd have been contact there.
I was just thinking Gaurini was fairly generous, but this is meant to be a, if you like, a gentleman's series. So the car survived to race again because they get another race tomorrow.
I mean, that whole section of the circuit is just so difficult to get right, and for a gentleman driver, scary. You know,
yes.
Coming over the hill at such speed, the circuit plunges down the hill with a kink to it, so you're not quite where you need to be. You want to be as far right as possible, but the circuit's putting you left, and you're going downhill, so the braking doesn't feel like it's working as well as it usually would, because the momentum is taking you down the hill. So there's a lot going on for certainly a car like this with such speed and performance. And you also know it's one of the better braking points, overtaking points in the circuit.
Yeah. Now this is Gianluca Giorgi about to put a lap on Sergio Sarmini. That KTM I would have thought would be going better actually, because Sarmini was pretty quick last year. He shares with Stefan Rossiner, and with the window opens in very early, with what, 5 seconds of it gone, if that, Sarmini is in to give way to Rossiner, and it might be that a bit like Chris Rosenberger, he's finding that KTM very nervous in these greasy conditions, but I would have thought that the track surface had improved enough by now.
Yeah, considering how the pace of the race has changed, I'm sure that the circuit's much more like it was in qualifying for them. But Racina should certainly put in some good times, good pace in the second half of the race. Obviously down in 12th position, some serious work to do, and a lap to our leaders. But the slower cars are now in pits and making way for their faster drivers.
Right, so down the hill comes Earhart. On this lap, Georgie's having another good go because he's done an absolute best within the first sector. Klaus Angerhofer has now done the fastest lap of the race, interestingly, in his charge in the KTM that seems to be getting stronger as it gets lighter and as the road dries out. But are we going to see the race leader in this time? Again, curbs used through the Variante Alta. Still a bit damp at the top of the hill, isn't it?
Yeah, and I wonder how damp it is through this section. Just this was the area where the rain seemed to come in at the start of the race. Certainly doesn't look too bad in the traction zones through Ravazza, but that plunge down the hill does look a little bit greasy still.
Absolutely. So up to the line goes Earhart. And the pit stop's cycling through. Angelo Negro is in. Now 88 gives way, therefore, to Luca Piri. Who else have we got into the pit lane? Peter Goulink's in to give way to Bert Longchamp. Nicolas Salen's in to give way to Stinus Longchamp. So you've got Dad and Lad on track in the same stint now. And the Brabham growls into the pit lane as well, which we've not seen a great deal of, but there it is. And Anders Fjordbach, last year's champion, ready to get on board. Kevin Weider hops out.
Lovely to see the car in the flesh.
Yes.
Fantastic looking machine. Down in 11th position, a big gap between themselves and that good little Audi battle that we saw earlier on in the race. So it will be work to do for Anders Fjordbach as well to get back into terms with that battle. And that's what they're here for, right? They're here to have an entertaining battle with like-minded drivers around them.
The Brabham, just going back to it, it's a kind of factory effort, if you like. The entrant is Brabham Automotive Factory Racing. So what they want to do is clearly develop the car, sell more cars, interest people in buying them and being competitive against the Audi. But let's see what Anders Fjordbach can do in the second stint. Kevin Weider's pace in qualifying, putting it to the back of the grid, but Fjordbach, we know, is very, very fast indeed. Leonardo Gaurini still hanging on to 5th. Now, an absolute best first sector set by the recovering Pierluigi Alessandri in the Lamborghini, but it is still Klaus Angerhofer who has that fastest lap of the race. Right, up towards the end of the lap comes the leader. Earhart stays out for one more at least. And the Brabham howls its way out of the pit lane, opposite where we are based at pit out. That's the second place car. Gianluca Giorgi coming up towards the completion of the lap. In real terms, he's not bringing the gap down. That's 4th, that's Klaus Angerhofer. As I say, he's done the fastest lap of the race, but Angerhofer goes through now. Into the pit lane has come Henri Hassid, so that means that this car now becomes 3rd as it comes over the line.
And on a very fast lap is the Lamborghini as well. We haven't yet seen Alessandri being on pace with the rest, but fastest through the first and second sectors of the lap now. He's been good in the first sector of the lap, but been losing time in the rest of the lap. But this time it looks like he's got that sorted. Let's see what he does in the final sector, or maybe this is a big push before he comes into pit lane.
That's Leonardo Gaurini coming in, another of the LP Racing fleet, because so too is teammate Henri Hassid behind. So team operates the cars, even if they're different cars for the customers, Audi or Porsche. So Pierluigi Alessandri, fastest lap of the race, kind of took the spin to get that out of him, didn't it? But granted, the road is also improving all the time as now Eli Earhart heads towards the end of his stint. You look at the Audi, but all you could hear there was the Brabham, such is the engine note that it makes. It's not that far up the road after its pit stop, but the Brabham, as I say, howls through. Down towards Ravazza comes Eli Earhart, the race leader.
He's driving that car well. The car looks dynamic, the way he's throwing it around. He's not tentative going into braking zones and putting in the inputs, leaning on the car and getting the car to work for him. Now we should see the timing screens light up with the new drivers in the cars. There should be lots of changes from the second half of the race.
Big flash at the lights from Angerhofer there to warn Leonardo Gaurini that you might be coming out of the pit lane, but I'm on a flying lap, don't get in the way. And now Pierluigi Alessandri with that fastest lap of the race, running in 4th, but of course he's got a pit stop due. So the leading quartet all yet to make the mandatory stops.
This is a bit unusual, isn't it? Previously lapped KTM,
yes.
Now on much better pace than trying to unlap himself.
Straight away, Stefan Rossina, former Porsche Super Cup racer, is on the lights, up the curb as well, and makes his move and goes through. So he's got a lot of work to do here. But of course, he will get the absolute maximum time for his stint so early in the window. His co-driver said he's something he come in.
So that's not for position, sadly. Rossina's first pass for position will be against the Brabham, 8 seconds up the road.
What he wants to do is unlap himself from this car as well. Number 18 then, the leader, comes down through Ravazza. Right, is he in this time? Because he's got 3 minutes and a bit of the window remaining. So, no, one more lap. Squeezing it to pretty much the end, which suggests, does it not, that the reason he's doing that is because he's quicker than Doppelmayr.
Yeah.
His co-driver.
We're still waiting for Angerhofer to come into the pits as Georgie comes in, but he's not changing drivers, so he just has to do the pit stop, stays in the car, and then will go back out once he's been stationary for the allocated amount of time.
Michael Vergers has now done the fastest lap of the race, having taken over Audi number 5 from Aurelius Rustica. So down the pit road now comes second place Porsche, Gianluca Giorgi. And there's another one in as well, is there not, which is another of the KTM's, Angerhofer. And Pierluigi Alessandri is given away to the redoubtable Sri Lankan driver Dilantha Malagamua, who is not only a prominent racer, but also motoring television presenter back home. And normally finds something to race somewhere, occasionally a little bit random, like Lamborghini Super Trofeo he's raced in, or he did the very first Bathurst 24-hour race, for example, with a Martin Short Mosler. But he barely misses a season. That is a good character, Dilantha Malagamua, and takes over the number 9 Lamborghini.
Now this car surely is due into the pits this time. If he does another lap, then the window will shut, so has to come in now. As you say, pushed it to the absolute maximum. But has he established enough of a gap over this Porsche, which we know can run at the same pace to the end of the race, to keep that victory?
Bang on cue, he's in. So as you were suggesting, it was kind of now or never, really.
It was now or naughty.
Quite, yes. And then another pit stop might have come for a penalty for not pitting in the window. But the team is ready. So Eli Earhart in for LP Racing. You've cycled all the other customers through. Four cars they've got, LP Racing this year. And there's Michael Doppelmayr ready to get on board. The team just checking the car, checking the tyre pressures. And so now this is going to be a qualifying effort, really, from Gianluca Giorgi to get the car back into the mix as Doppelmayr, the Austrian, gets on board. The other one to watch, possibly, Ben, is going to be 81, isn't it? Bert Langin, who for many, many years was a mainstay of the FIA GT Championship, Zolder 24-hour winner, Spa 24-hour winner, for example. And he's probably the most experienced driver in GT terms on the grid. And now that he's taken over 81, he's got some work to do, I'll grant you, but he should be able to gain places by the end, I would have thought. Yeah,
that fleet of Audis, actually, Longines Vergers and Longines Junior as well, I think are all faster than a couple of the cars ahead. So it could be very interesting to see how the field concertinas in the remaining 20 minutes of the race.
Right, down the pit road now goes Michael Doppelmayr. And he's still got a long drive down the pit lane as here comes the charging Gianluca Giorgi, who knows what the car is like, knows what the track is like, all the advantages that a driver fresh into a car does not have. And Michael Doppelmayr leaves the pit lane now. Accelerates gently away, I would say. Then, go on.
The gap was 10 seconds pre-pit stop, or pre-pit stops, and it seems to be about the same, I would suggest, when we get to the second sector of the lap. It'll sort itself out. But, yeah. I don't know how I would feel if I was Doppelmayr, being the less experienced driver, being the hunted.
Yeah, nervous, I think, to say the least.
Yeah, it's a kind of a weird pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was also a slower pit stop as against the Porsche. So a couple of seconds lost in the pits as well. So being very cautious, I would suspect, is Doppelmayr at the moment. Comes through Tosa. So he's trying to get himself used to the car again and get a feel for what a slightly slippery Imola might be like. And at the same time, look at Giorgi, he's with him. So I was thinking it looked like a big gap when they came out of the pit lane, but Gianluca Giorgi could well be in the lead on this lap alone because he is carving his way into the mix. He has a look to the inside approaching Acqua Minerale. If that were the last lap, he might have gone for it, but he doesn't need to at the moment because he's going to get the drive off the corner, up the hill, over the brow, and all of a sudden the lead changes. And Eli Earhart must be looking at this thinking, how's all that happened? Henri Hassidi's about to make a move to go second as well. And look at this, Hassidi's not that far away from the Porsche, so all of a sudden the complexion of the race has changed dramatically.
Unbelievable, just almost needed a couple more laps just to get himself into the rhythm. Being left so late, it hasn't given Doppelmayr any time to even get up to speed. And drops from first to third, and he hasn't even completed his outlap yet.
No, exactly. And he doesn't look confident in the car, does he, yet? So this is the new race leader, Gianluca Giorgi then, comes up, potentially to give a first win for a Porsche in GT2. Comes over the timing line, chased then by Henri Hassid. And the margin between those 1.3 seconds, and on that last lap, only by hundredths, admittedly, but the Porsche from the Audi Motors team was the quicker of the two. So Gianluca Giorgi now leads the way with 17 minutes and change on the clock, and potentially can still build this lead before the end of the race.
Doppelmayr did a 1:41 through the pits. Giorgi a 1:38, so that was a couple of seconds faster, but Hassid a 1:35. So of the three, he had the fastest pit stop, and that really has concertinaed those three up together, or had, until Doppelmayr unfortunately drops from first to third.
Well, the next question I'll offer you then is how much further can Doppelmayr drop before the end? Because we know that the KTM number 17 behind was going quickly. That's got a new driver on board now, Hubert Trunkenpolt. As you see, 911 under attack. So that's Leonardo Gaurini being squeezed up the curb, and past him goes Bert Langevin. So the Belgian driver for the PK Car Sport team goes through, gains ground. That's Michael Vergers, the Dutchman, also charging along. So he ought to make a move on Gaurini before the very end of the race. Langevin versus Vergers, by the way, for the Pro-Am lead, Pro-Am class. All the ones ahead are considered AMs, but these are the pros in Pro-Am cars now.
It's going to be a tricky one to get this pass done into Variante Alta, but he wants to get it done, Vergers, because he is also, he has a very fast Longines behind, so wastes too much time sitting behind this Porsche, which we know has been very kind when being passed, and he might find himself under pressure. This is the place to do it into Ravazza, but he's not close enough.
Not there, he's not. Still got the wiper on, hasn't he, Vergers? As the car that was started by Aurelius Rustiger comes up then to have a go at Gaurini's Porsche. Through goes Bert Langevin, escaping all the while, and the gap between the leader, Gianluca Giorgi, and Henri Hassid is 0.8 of a second. That's coming down again. Doppelmayr is a further 13 back. He's being reeled in by Hubert Trunkenpolt. And then Bert Langevin in 5th. So Langevin is 20 seconds off the race lead, but he's lapping quicker than everybody ahead of him at the moment.
I think Langevin can get himself onto the podium here. That's a real possibility.
Yeah.
And Vergers does find a way down the inside into the Villeneuve chicane. But as we saw before, the Porsche just with such legs coming off Ravazza, there were 3 or 4 car legs between the two of them as they braked into Tamburello. And I didn't think Vergers really had the opportunity, but it was good through Tamburello and set himself up for a dive into Villeneuve. Right, so there's the Porsche, Leonardo Gaurini, under attack from
Stinus Longchamp, son, as they dropped over the brow down the hill. Quick look on the inside, but Longchamp thinks better of it, Longchamp Jr. How also is Dylan Malagamua getting on in the Lamborghini? A couple of seconds adrift of what Alessandri was doing in that car earlier on. Again, to the inside line goes little Longchamp. Dad comes out the Variante out to the other side. And 81, Bert Longchamp still presses on. Now, what about sector times here? He's quicker than anybody on this lap in Sector 1, and he's quicker than anybody on this lap in Sector 2. So he is bringing down the gap, but he might run out of race. Certainly as far as the lead is concerned. Stinus Longchamp on the back and almost alongside now Leonardo Gaurini. The Porsche just has a bit more grunt in a straight line, doesn't it? So Longchamp slots back into the draft.
Yeah, I was trying to work out what Audi we were seeing just ahead of this group, and it is Doppelmayr who lost another 2 positions on that last lap. Oh, it's so tricky. Porsche trying to find a way through, but actually loses the position in the end.
So Stinus Longchamp goes ahead of Gaurini, and they both got ahead of Doppelmayr.
Wow.
So Gaurini stays where he is, effectively, in the order. And now Bert Longchamp goes third. That was Hubert Trunkenpolch he just got ahead of. Michael Berger's looking to get through as well. So Bert Longchamp now up into third place, 18 seconds off the leader. It's a mighty charge, this. And all of a sudden, of course, having drivers of differing pace in this second stint has made it very lively indeed.
That was a bit of a sketchy moment, actually, for trying to get past Doppelmayr for Gaurini, because he had the pace to stretch away from Longchamp, but then into the braking zone, found that Doppelmayr was on the brakes way earlier, I think, than he was expecting, and that allowed Longchamp to come up the inside of both.
So right now, Bert Longchamp, class leader, leading in Pro-Am, having taken over from Peter Gullings, and he will start tomorrow's race. Interesting that they've kept the wipers on, if only intermittently, but evidence of the wipers still being used. You could argue it's because they haven't got around to turning it off because they're all a bit focused on what they're doing behind the wheel. But Longchamp wants to try and go forward. Third he is, Verger's fourth behind him, but of course he needs to keep Verger's behind him in order to win the class.
As you say, Verger's switching from Porsche to Audi for this season. I wonder if he knows where the switch is. You know, it's not a big stalk like you have in your road car. There's lots of switches all over the place. Don't want to press the wrong one and find yourself putting the pit lane speed limiter on instead of switching the lights off.
So there's the race leader, Gianluca Giorgi, in the AM class Porsche. But look how close Henri Hassid is now to try and take that lead away. And also, interestingly, to point out, the absolute fastest first sector has just been posted by the Brabham. Anders Fjordbach, who we know is very quick, is getting on with the job in hand and trying to wring everything out of the new car. But although Gianluca Giorgi leads the way, Henri Hassid much, much closer to him in the second stint. You're making the point that he'd done a better pit stop. And there he is, closing all the while onto the tail of the Porsche, and now the Audi looks the stronger of the two, and Hassid perhaps lines up to have a go now, coming up towards the Variante Alta. He's on the outside line though, Ben.
That was beautifully done, the run, but he's going to really struggle to get the car stopped. Disappears onto the grass. Make sure you don't spin. They're very careful, both of them, coming out of the corner. But had just a beautiful run through Acqua Minerale. Started way back and just had that momentum, but unfortunately, the track layout didn't allow him to get past. He's going to have to work all over again to try and do that move again. And
Henri Hassid was very careful not to get ahead of the Porsche, so you could see he was almost self-centering as he got back onto the road, saying, well, I don't want to gain an advantage, so you go ahead of me. Equally, you saw how deep into the corner the Porsche had gone, so Gianluca Giorgi braked very, very late. There was no way that they were both going to get around the corner side by side, because even Giorgi only just made it. So Henri Hassid falls back just a little bit by half a second, and he has to go again. Now, what about Bert Longchamp, who is about to come across the timing line in third place? He's still got too much to make up in 10 minutes, but the podium we were predicting, and that's going to happen. His main focus now, Bert Longchamp, isn't attacking these two, it's keeping Verger's at bay for the class win. So Gianluca Giorgi out of the Villeneuve chicane, big slide up the curb there, hooking a wheel over it, Henri Hassid. He can't afford to do things like that, especially if those curbs are wet, because that's just going to spit the car off the road. He saved that one, but that was a heart-in-mouth moment for him. And this, Ben, the replay of the lead almost changing.
I think both of them were far too late on the brakes. Giorgi getting through the corner, but was going to surely going to run into the side of the Audi had the Audi decided to stay on the circuit. So wise driving from the two of them. But this was where Hasid was so good last lap. Hooked up the apex there, carried the momentum right onto the tail of the Porsche. He does it again, but ultimately it's just a bit tricky to really get a move done if you're battling for the race lead.
Out of the chicane they bounce then, all over the curb.
That's where he needs to carry the momentum through that chicane as well. So he's right on the tail of the Porsche coming into this braking zone, and this would be then the place for Hasid to try and make the move stick, because we know that the Porsche is so strong out of this corner, all the way up the main straight, all the way down into Tamburello. So not really an opportunity for the Audi to get past on this section of track.
Up to the timing line they come. Now, Porsche good in a straight line. We saw that in the other battle, if you remember the pace of Leonardo Gaurini's car in a straight line. So there, the margin stretches just a touch, but Henri Hasid, I would offer you now, looking like he's the stronger of the two. So this is going to go down to the wire, isn't it? In third place is Bert Langevin ahead of Michael Vergers, and then Stinas Langevin with 6th now Hubert Trunkenpolz, 7th is Gaurini, and 8th is Doppelmayr. So the car that led early on now way down the order in 8th place, having been utterly dominant in the first stint.
Defence this time into Tosa from the Porsche. That is going to allow maybe a switchback from Hasid. He gets the overlap on the exit, and he'll have the inside line for Piratella. Maybe he's done it.
Side by side they are, but again, the power of the Porsche and a bit of a squeeze as well keeps him ahead, but not for long, because on the inside line, committing to the corner, through goes Henri Hasid. The Audi does it. So our third different leader of the race, and it's Audi back up front. But Gianluca Giorgi has done what nobody has done in a Porsche hitherto in GT2, and that is make a real fight of it for the race lead, and he's not done yet. If he can apply the pressure to Henri Hasid, might be able to force a mistake out of him, but the Audi looks very planted, doesn't it?
The door was nearly shut on him, but unfortunately there was a foot just in it, so he couldn't quite shut the door. Nearly resulted in contact, and I think that spooked him to then reopen the door into Piratella and let him through. Now, if he's close enough at high speed, he could find a way through down into the Tamburello, because we know how good the Porsche is out of this corner down the main straight. He's a couple of car lengths back, so he might get onto the tail of the Audi, but might not have the opportunity to get down the inside.
This, in theory, is the part of the circuit where the gap might come down, but it almost looks, having lost the lead, as though a bit of the fight's gone out of Gianluca Giorgi. So he comes through in that second place once more, and he's down 8/10. Stinas Langevin now has set the fastest lap of the race. Pretty much everybody, I think, has had, or every car has had a turn of holding it, but right now it's number 11, Stinas Langevin, as his dad hangs on to third place and hangs on, therefore, to the class lead. But actually, they're both being caught by Stinas Langevin now. So if Langevin Jr. applies pressure to Vergers, that's going to help Dad, isn't it?
And now Vergers right on the tail. So it seems corner by corner these guys are changing who is the fastest of the three of the last lap in total with Steve. But we've seen Bert be faster, and we've seen Michael Vergers many laps having the fastest lap of the race. So very entertaining battle for what is now the class win, but also third on the overall podium.
Still with the wiper going then, Michael Vergers makes the climb. Heading now up towards the top of the circuit, ready to swing left, drop downhill towards the Acqua Minerale. So these two very evenly matched. The slight advantage, in a sense, ought to go Bert Langevin's way, because he's got a season's worth of experience of the Audi, whereas Vergers is fresh into the car this weekend. The race has got 5.5 minutes just over to go, and third, fourth, fifth, 1, 2 and 3 within the Pro-Am class. Slightly ironic, isn't it, to find the Pro-Ams so far behind AMs. But of the AMs, Henri Hasid, the race leader, very experienced driver. And over the brow they come down towards Ravazza. Bert Langevin hanging onto the place.
And these guys in the 44s, 43s, Hasid and Giorgi 45s, 46s. So with a few more laps to go, these guys might have been able to catch up the front two, but they certainly have the pace, and Vergers looks very threatening on Bert Langevin this time.
So now Vergers tries to line up to make a move. He's got the inside line for the Tamburello. He's got his nose in front as well as they hammer past the pits. Vergers late on the brakes. Through he goes. Third place, class lead. Michael Vergers goes through. The season last year ended with a a failure on the Porsche that pitched Michael off the road. Well, this could be a very good start to the season with the new car, with the Audi, because a class win, their first in GT2 as a partnership, these two, Aurelius Ristica and Michael Vergers, could be coming their way. Now that he's cleared Bert Langin, the high-class racing car looks like it's going to get clear.
And Steen back onto the tail of Dad as well.
Yeah.
Last lap he wasn't really with them, but with that little battling through the first couple of corners, it's allowed him to get back onto the tail. Will he be brave enough to stick it down the inside?
Delantha Malagamua is being caught by Anders Fjordbach, by the way. The Brabham is 11th, but could be in the top 10 by the very end. It's Laura Kramer at the foot of the order.
Yeah, there's half a second between the two of them now.
Yeah. Fjordbach and Malagamua, yeah. Right, race leaders then, 3 3/4 minutes to go. That gap has shot up to 3 seconds, having got into the lead. Henri Hassid has really built that advantage. So he's looking a little bit more secure up front.
Yeah, I wonder whether the best of the tyres has left that Porsche. I know that they can be very, very greedy on their tyres, and Georgie's pace has disappeared the last couple of laps. It's not that Hassid's gone faster, it is that that car has slowed after the last couple of laps. It could also be fatigue, of course. 50-minute race, we haven't had a driver change for either Porsche, and maybe he's just struggling a little bit as the Brabham goes ahead of the Lamborghini.
Indeed so Anders Fjordbach now into the top 10, but you're right, that's another slow lap out of Gianluca Giorgi, a 45.5 for the leader and a 48 for the car in second place, so he's losing big chunks of time. Now, yeah, if it is fatigue, making sure he gets to the end and all that, but he's only 11 seconds up the road now on Michael Vergers, so suddenly all bets are off there. And this is another look at the Brabham making the move on the inside at Tosa. Fjordbach through ahead of Delantha Malagamua. The Sri Lankan driver drops down to 11th spot. But yes, I'm getting more and more concerned about Gianluca Giorgi's pace and the inter-Nissan fight between the Longins. Still going Bert's way, but his son is right on his tail now.
Might have had a little bit of hassle through Tosa. We didn't quite see it, but they were very, very close exiting the corner. Once again, he's really leaning on the Audi to try and carry the momentum through Acque Minerale up the hill. It's quite worked for Steen this time. Gap starts to develop. 2 minutes remaining of the race. It's going to be a couple of laps. Might just be one more, actually. You haven't had the leader over the line yet.
No, still in the third sector, I think. So, might be starting his last lap imminently. So, the race leaders go through. Henri Hassid, what's a lap time? 45. This might be the last lap. I think it's going to be the last one. So, Henri Hassid, 5.4 seconds ahead of Gianluca Giorgi. Giorgi to Vergers is now 3 seconds. So, Michael Vergers is almost with him. But he's only got one more lap in which to do the catching. But what was that last lap by Gianluca Giorgi? It was a better one, wasn't it? Still not as good as Vergers, but it was more representative of the car's pace. But there it is, second the Porsche, third the Audi behind. Vergers throwing everything at it, curb and all. And there, Bert Langin keeping Steeners Langin, his son, at bay. But Michael Vergers in sector 1, 4 tenths closer. He's not going to get there in time, is he?
Not unless we see another error come into that Porsche that we've seen on previous laps. But had it been a 48 like we've seen on previous laps, then there would have definitely been an opportunity for Vergers.
I think it's fair to say this is the best GT2 race we've had since the category started last year, because things have been going on all the way through. We've had lots of different leaders. We've had perhaps more cars, more competitive as well, whereas last year the high-class racing Audi did tend to rather dominate when it was on a mission. But Henri Hassid, new to the championship, is set for a win. So it's the first race he's had in this car, first race for him in the championship, and he comes over the brow. The clock's going to hit 0 as he works his way out of Ravazza, and the checkered flag will await him therefore. So Henri Hassid is going to be the race winner, having started 4th on the grid. So he's had a good run in this race, working his way with a steady pace up to the win. Checkered flag is at the ready then, and towards the line comes Henri Hassid. There is the flag. There is honours in the opening round of the Fanatec GT2 European Series 2. Henri Hassid second is going to go the way of Gianluca Giorgi. Michael Vergers comes across the line, and the margin between them at the end was 1.3 seconds. Fourth, Bet Longin, fifth, Stinas Longin. So that's all right. Pocket money can still be paid. Dad wasn't beaten. And the top 6 will be rounded out by Leonardo Gaurini. But a really interesting race and a good drive by Henri Hassid. And Anders Fjord back in the Brabham has just gained another place, has he not, at the expense of Michael Doppelmayr. So he's going to be 9th. Doppelmayr 10th in the car that led all of the first stint.
Yeah, Doppelmayr's pace 52s, 51s, as opposed to his teammate Earhart doing 45s. So 7 seconds off teammate and ultimate pace of the race, which is a bit of a shame. Shame for that 18 car. And here it comes, the Brabham then. Will be 9th in the end. So it didn't feature very heavily in the first part of our race. Dead last at one point before the 2 KTMs fell behind it. But it comes across the line and completes the race. And that is great news for Brabham, for high-class racing, and for the previous champion, Anders Forbach.
Yeah, who at one point had got the fastest lap of the race. The best that the car did was a 43.4, and the best lap of the race was a 43.4, 43.486. His best was a 43.491. So 0.05 of a second was all that he was away from the fastest lap, which would suggest that in Fjordbach's hands, certainly, that Brabham's going to be a competitive car. If he starts the race tomorrow from up near the front, then that's certainly going to be one to watch. And again, showing you the different pace of co-drivers.
Well, it was a fascinating race, thanks to the different pace of co-drivers.
Yeah, and possibly the weather early on, possibly the little sprinkling of rain we had before the start.
Yeah, we really needed a bit of confidence in those first couple of laps. It really was tricky conditions for those drivers in high-powered machines. Perhaps not necessarily the most experienced of drivers as well, with the AM drivers starting the race.
So Henri Hassid, the race winner, 5 seconds to the good he was. And is the rain returning now?
Yeah, is that a new spot?
I think it is. Yeah, so just as the GT2 drivers complete their race and the GT3 teams get set for pre-qualifying, so more spots of rain appear. But a great drive by Henri Hassid, experienced GT racer, BMW Z4s, if you go back to the early days of what has now become GT World Challenge Europe. And then he had a spell racing in the ELMS, but Henri Hassid, good to have him back in the SRO paddock. And he'll be a very happy man with an outright win. If I say a rare outright win, I don't mean that rudely, but he was often in a Pro-Am categorisation. Therefore, you couldn't really fight for an overall win, but he here, by dint of being in a Pro-Am series and driving on his own, triumphs, and he's all smiles.
And best lap of that car, a 44.8, so a second off the ultimate fastest lap time. But he stayed in that, let's not forget, he stayed in that car throughout the whole race, had that experience, didn't have to hand over to a teammate who needed to get up to speed. Same with the Porsche in second position as well. That was the way to go.
So Henri Hassid takes honours in the first Fanatec GT2 European Series race. A solo effort, beating the Porsche of another soloist, Gianluca Giorgi. Third goes the way of Aurelius Rustica and Michael Vergers, ahead of Peter Gulings and Bert Longin from Nicolas Seilens and Stinas Longin. Sixth, Leonardo Gaurini, ahead of Klaus Angerhofer and Hubert Trunkenpolz with the KTM. Angelo Negro and Luca Piri, eighth, ahead of Kevin Wieder and Anders Fjordbach, with 10th, Elia Earhart, who dominated stint 1, and Michael Doppelmayr, who did the second stint. After a spin, Alessandro Pierluigi to land for Malagamua's Lamborghini 11th. Serdi Sarmini struggled before he gave way to Stefan Rossina. That car 12th, and Chris Rosenberger struggled before giving way to Laura Kreimer and the KTM, completing the 13-strong entry. So it is a win for Henri Hassid. First time out in a GT2 car, and a happy man he is for sure. Drivers being given their Pirelli winners' caps. And very shortly they will head to the podium. First, though, let's have a look at the highlights of that race that began with Elia Earhart on pole position. Bit of rain pre-race, enough to make drivers rather nervous. They're all on slicks, so an element of caution required. And as the cars accelerated away from the outside of the front row, initially it was Nicolas Seilens that got the drop. But then as the cars headed up towards Tamburello for the first time Earhart from pole asserted himself and went through. Was a little bit wide over the curb. Further back went Leonardo Gaurini. Earhart got on with the job early doors, built that gap over Gianluca Giorgi. Leonardo Gaurini was on the attack as well. So too Henri Hassid, working his way through on the inside of the number 15, Chris Rosenberger. KTM was bouncing over the curb, was Klaus Angerhofer in number 17. In 81, Peter Gullings, when he became more confident, started to make progress, picking his way through the field. The Brabham, however, was not having a great time in the first stint, although Kevin Weider had enough pace early on to move himself up ahead of Chris Rosenberger, who seemed to be struggling in the KTM. This moment at Rivazza befell Pierluigi Alessandri, who was able to carry on. More would come. He charged on, caught up with the Audis once more, as down at Rivazza, through on the inside went Klaus Angerhofer, having a very good run in the KTM. The contact here did for number 9. Around went the Lamborghini, Pierluigi Alessandri having a spin, and as the pit window opened, stops cycled through, and amongst them, Kevin Weider gave way to Anders Fjordbach, who folded himself into the Brabham. Michael Doppelmayr relieved the race leader, Eli Earhart, but could not match his pace. New to the car and struggling in his stint, it meant that even on his outlap, pretty much, he lost 2 places, as through into the lead of the race went Gianluca Giorgi, and also into second spot, Henri Hassid. So the 2 cars from the second row of the grid then started fighting for the race lead, and they very nearly both ran out of road up at the Variante Alta. As it was only Hassid that went off the racetrack, but made sure he didn't profit from all of that. He made his move at the top of the hill. Through on the inside went the Audi. P1 for Henri Hassid, and at the checkered flag, it was his race. The opening race of the Fanatec GT2 European Series falls then to Henri Hassid, as the Longins battled their way to the line for second and third in Pro-Am, with Bert ahead of Steeners. So that's a look at what was a very lively race, and the drivers now making their way to the podium. But Henri Hassid doing a very good job there, but you've got to feel a little bit for Eli Earhart. I mean, I know it's part and parcel of 2-driver races and differing speed of a co-driver and so forth, but you know, he did a really, really good first stint, and within a lap, the car was tumbling down the order.
And with within a lap of the race, it was 5 seconds up the road in the hands of Eli Earhart.
Yeah.
The opening couple of laps in the tricky conditions, he just had the confidence to push and generate temperature like nobody else in the grid, and really did a fantastic first couple of laps, and then everybody else built the temperature, built the confidence to at least match him, but by that point he had a 10-second advantage. But yeah, the 7 seconds slower per lap, his teammate, so that was a real difficult one.
So we have the drivers making their way onto the podium with a Pro-Am and an Am podium. So it's the Ams first, Leonardo Gaurini, then we have Gianluca Giorgi and Henri Hassid for the top step. More from the Fanatec GT2 European Series tomorrow. For now, well done, Henri Hassid, and from Ben Considuris and David Addison, it's goodbye from Imola.
The pictures, so please can you show the trophies? Picking up your caps, showing the trophies.